Welcome, everyone. So excited to have this discussion. We're just getting started. Let's make sure everyone's ready to go. Just wait a minute here. We're going to be having a discussion about giving and receiving constructive feedback, and I'll add in a psychologically safe and equitable way. So it's really powerful. Super excited to have this discussion with three awesome speakers and panelists that are joining me today. I will start with introducing myself. I'm Janine Yancey. Pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and CEO of Emtrain. We're a culture tech platform company that provides online lessons and analytics on respect and inclusive topics such as performance feedback. I will also, before I turn it over to have our other panelists introduce themselves, say a big thank you to our partner and sponsor today, All Voices. They did an incredible job in putting this together. All Voices is an employee feedback platform company allowing employees to give anonymous feedback and report issues on bias and harassment and other culture issues in a psychologically safe way, which definitely ties into kind of our conversation today. And so, Kate, I'll start with you. Can you please introduce yourself?
I'd love to. Thank you, Janine. Hi, my name is Kate Gantner. I work for Thorn. We are a nonprofit organization in the tech space working to protect children online. I'm a member of our people and culture team, a senior manager, in fact, on people development, and my pronouns are she, her. Joey, I can popcorn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Joey Rosenberg. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Women Who Code. We are the world's largest community inspiring women to excel in technology careers, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. How about you, Marlena?
Hello, my name is Marlena Edwards. I am the Chief People Officer at HLK, marketing and advertising agency based in St. Louis, but we hire all across the country. My pronouns are she, her. I lead up HR and talent, really coming up with strategies and programs that are hopefully equitable and inclusive. So very timely conversation to be had and appropriate.
Yeah, so totally excited to kind of help facilitate this conversation. And just for a little housekeeping items, I would encourage folks listening in, go ahead and use the chat feature to type in any questions. And all of us are pretty good multitaskers, so we might be typing in responses as we kind of have this conversation. And let me just do a little bit of table setting for our conversation today. So I think, as we all know, we're in the middle of this great resignation where people are kind of learning sometimes after the fact that there was less connective tissue. That's kind of how I think of it, between them and their team members and their direct reports. And it ends up being, and many times, just a lost opportunity to have a path that would have been a great path, and certainly finding out after the fact is never a fun experience. So I think what we'd like to do today is, in kind of context of what's happening, the social dynamics, have a conversation about how we can be proactive as people leaders and create an environment and a culture that is really just conducive to just having this really open, kind of healthy, safe feedback. And so with that as the backdrop, let's just kick off the conversation about why is it important to have psychologically safe feedback? And I'm happy to give my 2 cents, but I'm sure my amazing 3 panelists have their ideas too.
Yeah, Janine, do you want me to jump in?
I would love that, Joey.
Sure. So why is it important to create this kind of space for psychologically safe feedback? In my experience, especially in this remote environment, if people can't show up as themselves, if people don't feel safe on their team, in their work environment, then they're not able to do their basic job functions, right? So on the one hand, from a business perspective, it helps your team be more effective and productive. But from the human side, myself as a queer, biracial married woman, parent, all the things, right? We're all dealing with this incredible pressure from all different sides. And I think there's just a human factor. And as leaders, we have a responsibility to create that level of safety so that people can feel safe in their workplace and able to build their livelihood and their career.
Thank you, Joey. I think that's, what I'm hearing from you is just the ability to be kind of your authentic self, and you need a psychologically safe space to do that. And Marlena, I'm going to turn to you. I think you had commented in one of our kind of chats beforehand of kind of giving people your kind of recipe about what you're all about, like it
Yeah.
kind of preceding a relationship with that. I would love to hear more.
Yeah, so I think that, when you talk about psychological safety, I think at the center of that is trust, right? And so when you're talking about whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you're talking about belonging, we say we want people here because of their differences, because of what they bring to the table. You have to have an environment where people feel comfortable sharing. So if there's something happening that does not feel great or authentic or is not in line with culture, vision, or values, you want to have an environment where people can raise their hands, where they can share their concerns, where they can share their experiences. And hopefully that in some way, shape, or form is able to shape how the culture changes and shifts. And I think that one of the things that we've seen for a really long time is that there hasn't been a lot of psychological safety in workplaces in years past. And it meant that there was really a homogenous type, especially when you look at marketing and advertising agencies specifically, right? People had this stereotype of what that meant. And a lot of that was because there wasn't a safe space for people to be encouraged to share their points of view, to share what didn't feel great or what worked really well and why. So I do think that in order to build that psychological safety, you have to start with trust. Your employees have to feel like it is authentic, that it is ingrained as a part of the culture. And so finding ways to make sure that you're encouraging people to not just be curious, which is one of our values, but also out of that curiosity, making sure that they feel safe asking questions and pushing boundaries respectfully or pushing back respectfully. So I do think that we have to really work on how we build connections, which leads to psychological safety, which will lead to the feedback that we want, that will ultimately help us shift and shape our cultures and environments.
Thanks, Marlene. I want to riff a little bit off of what you just said. And Kate, I want you to be thinking about kind of, your experiences too. But before we turn to you, Kate, so just to get a little granular, Kate, like, so I know, Marlena, I know, like, just seeing kind of interactions, with people from different cultural backgrounds, different generational backgrounds, right? We all have very different, like, you can have the same conversation and two people could have two completely different kind of perceptions of what just occurred, right? And that's part of the turbulence, I think, that we're all experiencing right now when we have such a different, such a really diverse workforce, more so than we've ever had in history. And Marlena, to your point, we've now reached a kind of a pivotal point where it's not just all conforming to this one norm. It's like, okay, now we're all free to be ourselves. Great. But we all have such different life experiences, which informs how we process information, that going back to your recommendation of giving people kind of a recipe on how to navigate yourself, I just have two thoughts that I want to share. So one, and I know I do this, I will tell people, listen, I have a really thick skin that's both good and bad. So assume good intent. And if I say something too bluntly, too directly, I'm giving you the open door, giving you the green light to please come back to me and say, ouch, Janine, that's a little too ouchy, And so just on a real tactical level, I just think people need to get super granular when they're forming relationships proactively, right? So then we have a context for interpreting that information. And then secondly, at Emtrain, we have what we call the workplace color spectrum, which is color coding actions and competence, not people. So it's, again, that same rubric of, like, assume good intent. Let's not castigate people, but let's have a mechanism, a safe mechanism for giving feedback like in real time on how we are processing and experiencing different comments. And so green is our best selves, yellow is when we're being reactive and kind of thoughtless. Orange is when we're getting a little, implications of some bias, or feeling like, oh, this is a little exclusive. And then red's toxic. So we have found that's super helpful. But I do think that we're living in a time where we need to really intentionally build a common framework to have these conversations to support effective feedback.
Oh, for sure. It's funny because we are in the middle of our performance end of year performance reviews. And one of our initiatives this year was really around equipping our managers with the tools to be effective leaders. And we've built out a learning track for managers. And the first one that we're rolling out intentionally is coaching and feedback. And we had the first session yesterday. And a lot of what you're talking about is, really kind of what is that model? So how do you create authentic relationships with people? How do you really kind of ask the questions about what really helps motivate them? What type of feedback do they really respond to? How do they like to hear feedback? How do they like to give feedback, right? So maybe it's not in the moment, they need some time to think about it, they'll come back. So I do think that it is really timely, but also one of the big key pieces as I've been going through the process and meeting with our people leaders is when you say something and it's at a 30,000 foot view and something as simple as like, you're doing a great job, what does that mean? Right. And so to your point, that specificity is really, really important. The details are really, really important. And I think sometimes as managers, you're like, we meet all the time. They know what I'm saying. Like it is what it's clear. But I think being really, really specific, really transparent is important, so that you're speaking the same language, so that there's alignment, but also building in that space again for questions or comments or how does that feel? Or what do you think? Is that in line with where you were going? So
yeah, no, excellent. And Kate, your kind of 2 cents on this topic based on some of the things that lessons learned on your side.
Yeah, no, I think there's already been some great feedback, and I love that we're really rooting it in trust, right? I mean, I think that's what it's all about, that authenticity. Marlena, your example reminded me of something that we do as a remote distributed organization, even pre-COVID days, is we've really tried to lean into like making that implicit explicit. And so instead of you joining our team and us taking 3, 6, 12 months to really understand your style, your feedback preferences, we actually have everyone on our team write an individual user guide. And so it's a public thing that everyone has access to. We actually do an annual spring cleaning of just updating that, because maybe your preferences have changed in the backdrop of a global pandemic and you'd actually prefer to have feedback given or received in a completely different way than you would have pre-2020. So I think really in that remote work environment, there's some nuances to actually talk the talk and not, or, walk the walk and not just talk the talk kind of thing. So just to throw that in as well.
No, thank you, Kate. That's totally helpful. Let's move on to talk about why the component or criteria of anonymous feedback is so important, so vital. And let me just start off with at Emtrain, and let me just back up a little bit. My background before starting Emtrain was an employment lawyer or litigator, right? So I was seeing what happens when people on teams have conflict day in and day out for years, and kind of like your family therapist, I kept on starting to see patterns where it's like, oh, this person said this, that person said that, and we're gonna have XYZ happen in about a week, and you just get to be really kind of well versed in seeing what's going to happen, and that actually led me to starting Emtrain as a way to like prevent conflicts from happening in the trenches. But with that kind of as a background on kind of my experience and what informs me, I have seen, at Emtrain, how they're not inclined. And we actually have, so within our solution, we're doing kind of a mini surveys and pulsing as primed by video scenes. So people are watching video scenes and we might say, okay, so how does it show up, in your workplace? And so people are answering. And in that context, we have generated information that 57% of employees, if they see something, they won't tell their managers, they won't tell HR. So it's really just kind of a stopgap. Like that information that's happening in the trenches never makes its way up to leadership or the people function. More than half, and that's what I saw as an employment litigator. That's what we see at Emtrain, because let's face it, there's kind of only negatives for the person reporting stuff. There's not really any positives. So with that as a loaded question, let's turn to our panelists and hear from you folks.
Yeah, so I agree. I think anonymous feedback is critical. I want to pick up on one of the questions in the comments that Sandy dropped about annual feedback and is it really meaningful or not? So I think this actually picks up on a lot of the things that we're talking about right now. I believe that having constant feedback all the time in a lot of different ways is critical to being successful as a team and as an organization. And I think anonymous feedback has been a game changer for us at Women Who Code. I was having this conversation with a team leader not that long ago about how you have to really be in tune to hearing what's being said and what's not being said. And if you've created trust in your team and you've built those relationships, then you know when something's off, you know when something's wrong, even if someone's not saying it. And if you've created that trust, you can have those open conversations. Anonymous feedback is critical because, as you said, the only result for the person giving the feedback is negative, right? Like it's really risky to raise something, especially depending on what the topic is. And especially if you think that your opinion is very different or what you've observed is very different than that of senior leadership or senior management. And so at Women Who Code, we actually implemented All Voices a couple of years ago as our anonymous feedback tool. So any employee at any time can go on and leave a comment and it goes directly to our senior leadership. And it has been really incredible. And we get everything in there from, I wish we had t-shirts, to really serious culture implications, things that we really need to address on all different levels. And so it's really helpful to have this like anonymous communication channel. We also do a monthly survey to do pulse checks. Our people and inclusion team run those. And of course, not everyone's going to fill out a survey because everybody has a different style, but it at least gives us a sample. And again, that's anonymous. So at the same time, we're building trust on a one-to-one level. We have this, we build a lot of trust by saying, hey, we really value your feedback. It's open, it's here, and you can give it in the format that you want to give it in.
Yeah, I would think, before I turn to Marlena and Kate, Joy, is just listening to you, I would think that just your talent executives would be saying, this is really part of our brand strategy, like our recruitment retention, that we take this so seriously that this is part of what we do to provide, support for our workforce.
That's exactly right. And especially for us, because we're a mission-driven organization and our mission is to inspire diverse women to excel in tech. If we're not walking the walk internally, then we lose trust in our community. And that's the core of our business. So for us, we have to walk the walk internally. And that doesn't mean that we get it right every time. So I just want to be transparent. Yeah. Being great at receiving and giving feedback isn't about getting it right every time. It's about being willing to be thoughtful and intentional. And as our chief legal officer often says, move imperfectly forward, learning all the time. And so, but I do think in terms of a brand strategy for us, it's critical because it's core to our business.
Yeah, so for all the issues we're talking about today, I just want to kind of give people some comfort. We all make mistakes, so at Emtrain, our motto is we're always learning. Right. And it's really the commitment to get wiser, not smarter in terms of book knowledge, but wiser in terms of people and understanding people and navigating people in a more kind of graceful, savvy way. It's hard. I mean, I always, when I lead workshops about respect in the workplace, I'm like, okay, our divorce rate is 50% in America. And imagine the separation rate of people who are not married. I mean, that just shows you how hard it is to maintain relationships. And that's a personal relationship where you might have, vacations and a house and all this connective tissue. Imagine take out that connective tissue and that's what you have in the workplace. You don't really have any of the good stuff connecting you, but it's, maintaining and navigating relationships is hard. So anonymous and why it's so important. So Marlena, let's turn to you.
Yeah, I think that, anonymous feedback is obviously important for many reasons. And I think having a legal background, really kind of a lot of the more serious critical issues that you deal with, people are really feel fearful of retaliation. And I think that having that extra confidence of knowing or comfort of knowing that you don't necessarily have to tie your name to something, that you are raising a red flag, or you are being an advocate, or you're being a good ally, and that there is someone on the other end who is going to do what they need to do to investigate and get down to the bottom of it. So I do think that anonymous feedback is critical. I think it does go back to, though I've been in environments where we have had anonymous, 1-800 numbers, emails, inboxes, and people still don't feel comfortable because they feel like there's somebody behind the curtain and somebody's always going to be able to trace it back, and what is going to happen to me. And so I think it always goes back to that level again that we're talking about of trust, and how do people really kind of engage with the culture? What do they feel when they walk through the door? And so making sure that there are examples that can be held up as, here is what we heard, here is the action that we took. So I think that there also has to be a level of accountability from the organization for people to also trust that action is there, because we've hinted at like engagement surveys, we've talked about performance feedback. Employees really want to know that there's a level of accountability, not just that they're heard, but that there is some action being taken based on the information that they've shared, right? And so whether that is the first step of looking into it and investigating it, maybe it's the second step of publicly making the statement around some of the behaviors or actions that are happening and changing policies. So I do think that you always have to couple that anonymous feedback with accountability, with follow-up, so that circle is closed, that circle of trust is closed. And I think it's also a very, very important point of what you said about just that constant learning journey, right? You're not going to get it right all the time. And people change, cultures change, times change. And so you're constantly evolving what it is that is at the forefront of the people who are part of your environment. I remember joining, marketing and advertising. It was like, no religion, no politics, like not in here, just keep it out of here. And now I've worked in organizations that if you didn't address what was going on in the outside world, I don't want to be here, right? I want to be a part of an organization where we're able to talk about these things that are impacting our lives. So I do think that, again, being a lifelong student, making sure that you are staying curious. And it is hard. It is time consuming, but just trying to make those opportunities and asking questions where you don't have the answers, right? And telling people we're working on it, and we've brought in consultants to really kind of help us get some specificity and wrap our arms around whether it's terminology, what do we say, with times changing, who's right, what direction do you go in? So it's a lot, but I think that as long as you're showing progress of, again, building that trust, being on that journey, and it's demonstrated, I think that employees definitely do respect and appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Excellent. And Kate, how do you weigh in on this?
I mean, I think we've heard some great examples and some great context here. I think what I would add is, anonymous feedback allows the opportunity to give feedback within a power dynamic that just may not be available otherwise, right? And as much as we'd like to think that we've created a safe workspace that, psychologically safe, that has laid that groundwork for folks to speak up, I mean, I think inevitably having that anonymous route is just another avenue We've partnered with All Voices, of course, as well. And I think what's really been the game changer for us in that is that we can then follow up, right? We can check back in anonymously 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line and be like, did that make a difference? Have we moved the needle forward, or are we still seeing the same results despite our best efforts to make progress? And so I think that's really, again, fundamental to that trust building piece, and something that's really been important to our organization.
I love that, Kate, because, you know, to pick up on what you just said, and Marlena, this was in one of your comments too, you know, this is hard, and it actually kind of creates a whole nother wheel of work, right? And so it's a matter of going into it, knowing that you as a leadership team need to demonstrate your commitment to it and follow up and show like, hey, we are working on this, as illustrated by, and hopefully, you know, the team can prioritize their capacity so they can move the needle on at least, you know, some of the feedback being raised. Because the downside of this is if you just receive it and don't act upon any of it, then you've just lost trust, you know, as we're talking about. So it definitely, you know, you have to be ready to be on that journey for sure.
And just to add to that, I love that, Janine. And just to add to that, I think just like one-to-one, you have to create space so that when an issue comes up, you can talk about it. I think you have to do that with your team and your organization as well. So for example, we have 2 stand-ups a week. On Monday, we give organizational updates. So if we are receiving feedback or if we're addressing something, we try to give an update in that space just as a normal course of business. And then every Thursday, our teams get to give updates. So it comes sort of once a week from the executive team and once a week from all contributors to the team. And then, of course, if we have particular topics, we might have additional stand-ups and all hands and things like that. But I think normalizing updates in the same way that you normalize conversations with your team members, normalizing business updates in whatever format works for your organization is really important.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, Joy. Thank you. So Kate, I'm going to turn to you. So how do we, why don't you start off the conversation on how we create a culture that's just really prime for everyone to feel comfortable giving feedback? What have you folks been able to do?
I love this question. And I think, you know, it's an art, not a science. Constantly trying new things is key, and what may have worked for a little bit may not always work. So being a little bit flexible in that. But I think a key component for us is just really being intentional in building points of connection. You know, really connecting as humans, as not just a floating head on Zoom, but as real whole people. Creating that safety, that trust, I think then makes it easier to connect as colleagues and have some of those tougher conversations and know where folks are coming from and kind of see the whole picture is probably one point that I would start with.
No, that's excellent. Joey, what about your experiences?
I think creating culture, I think there are a lot of different moving parts and components to it, but I think the biggest thing is about what you see and experience every day. So it's making sure that everyone on your team, especially leadership roles, but everyone on your team have the tools and resources to be able to walk the walk every day. And they can only do that if they have training, they have clear policies, if they know what's expected. And if you keep reminding everyone all the time what the expectations are. And I think for us, the very first thing that we ever did, and this probably went into place in the very, very early days, so it's been there for a long time, is establish our code of conduct. Mm-hmm. And we use this in all public and internal meetings. If you work for Women Who Code, or if you're in our community and you haven't seen our code of conduct, I would be completely surprised. I would say stick around for another week. I'm sure it will pop up somewhere, but it's also readily available on our website. So our code of conduct creates a foundation. And then from that, we've just continued to build out policies and practices. So things like having an employee handbook that both meets all the legal check boxes and reflects our culture. Conducting our meetings in the same way that we would conduct conduct our community events. So I think it's about walking the walk, and giving people tools, resources, and clear expectations, and giving them a voice in creating that. So whenever we're making a change, we always consult the team. We often consult our community as well, depending on if it impacts them or not. So we aren't doing this alone, right? We are a movement, and movements are made up of a lot of people, not just one. So that constant consultation, I think, is really critical.
Excellent. And Marlena, I know that you are pretty strategic in how you seed that culture just from the beginning, from the onboarding experience. And I think everyone will totally appreciate if you kind of share your strategy with us so that we could maybe emulate that.
Yeah, I think it is a combination of what Kate and Joey said, right? So really kind of outlining your mission, your vision, your values, right? So be brave, be curious, be thoughtful. What are those behaviors that we want to see modeled every day? What are the behaviors that we reward and recognize every day? And so I think really kind of setting the groundwork there, but also what are those programs and policies and practices that are going to help us support that? Very much like Kate said, you do oftentimes have to iterate and figure out, hey, we say this in the beginning, where is this showing up? Where is it not showing up? Is that program still serving the purpose that we had originally intended? So I do think that having those check-ins and making sure that things still feel fresh and relevant in the way that they were intended. For us, we have scaled quite quickly in our organization. We've also moved to that distributed hybrid model. So there was a lot of change management initially over the last year. And so we really had to think about a lot of the programs that we were changing and updating to make sure that they still felt the same and were received the same as when we were in office in one city and able to build in person. And so I do think that things that do really do enhance our culture and help move initiatives along are setting up like a people team for us, right? It's outside of our HR community. It is a group of employees who are super engaged, who want to make sure that we're finding ways to connect with one another, putting a real budget and investment and time commitment behind that. So every quarter we're looking at how are we making sure that teams are staying connected or employees across our organization are staying connected, that we're providing opportunities that not necessarily managers have to think of and implement because everybody's burnt out and everybody's tired. So how do we make sure that's woven in throughout the organization? When we're talking about some of the things that really do matter to people, right? We do the work that we do every day, but we also have social justice initiatives and pro bono work. And so if there's something that we can feed from a passion perspective that also ties back to our values, can we make sure that we're drawing people in there and they understand really kind of why these things are important to us and also helping us to deliver against that. And even our DE&I council. So if there are things that are coming up, and again, when you're at the executive level, you're not as close to the day-to-day. Depending on the acumen of the leaders that you're working with, some things may bubble up, some things may not. But you want to make sure that there is a mechanism for information to be transferred. And so if you can create groups or councils of employees across all levels, across all disciplines, again, you generally start to get information and insight at all levels that will help you create more programs that are more effective and are at the root of really kind of what some of the concerns and challenges or curiosities are within the organization. So I think being open to iterate and change, making sure that there are moments within your onboarding and employee journey throughout their cycles, life cycles with the organization are there and that they are authentic to the mission and the value of the organization as well as the employee.
So I just love even just thinking about that. It's kind of an interesting, we've had ERGs for a long time, but just taking a step back and thinking about that, Marlena, in terms of like, this is kind of a bottoms up mechanism, right? So that we're spreading the load. It's not just the people or HR function. It starts to get, spread within the whole workforce, and everyone is kind of part of the solution of like, all right, this is on all of us. So that's from the macro level. And then for the micro level, Marlena, I think you had commented, prior to this discussion that, in onboarding, you've started a practice within your organization, I think, of checking in, just new employee onboarding, like, okay, how's it going? And just kind of feeding that kind of flow so people just get used to it like from day one.
Absolutely. We have 30-day check-ins. We have 90-day check-ins. We do a mid-year and then we do the end of the year. You have to build in those milestones. There are going to be managers who innately meet weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. There are innately going to be managers who may be new or may not have the strongest managerial acumen. So you have to build those things in. And I think providing a framework for the types of questions and engagement and moments that should happen at those different stages of the journey is really important. So we were talking about, how do you like to receive feedback? I think that is a great question to ask in the upfront, to establish really that relationship and that cadence and that style up front is really important. I think after 3 months, really making sure that, as Joey said, making sure people have the tools. So are you understanding our objectives for our projects or for our client deliverables? Is there a tool or a process that's not clear, or at least is not working, at least in your eyes? How do we help facilitate those conversations so that it's not an employee feeling like, I don't want to bother my manager, or I'm feeling inept, but it is a two-way, it is a conversation around, really what you need, how things are going, are we meeting our milestones? And if not, like, let's come up with a plan together on how we're going to get there.
Yeah, so I want to riff on that a little bit because, to your point, we're all different. We all like to hear feedback differently, right? And some people need kid gloves, some people don't. I mean, we're all different. So how do we think about, and how have you folks supported your managers and people leaders so that they are more skilled than not in figuring out, okay, I've got a team of direct reports, they all need something differently. How do you equip them with the skills they need to do that effectively? And Marlena, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I was going to try to get my thoughts together on this one. I think that if I had a 100% fail-proof answer for this, I'd be a rich woman. I think it all depends on, full transparency here, it all depends on your organization and the level of investment that you can make. One of the ways that I've found to be successful in assessing really kind of the tools that people need is understanding what is our baseline, right? So when we talk about, we want people to be people leaders or people managers, what are the skills and the tools that at a baseline that they're going to have to be proficient at, and making sure that there is a mechanism for them to understand what those tools are and for them to develop those tools if they don't automatically exist. So sometimes it's really starting there, like what does managerial acumen look like to us, or what does success look like as a manager here, and making sure the things that we've identified, that there's a tool or a lever that we can pull to help people gain those skills. I think that when you're talking about, inclusion and how people learn, everybody learns differently. Some people are visual learners, some people like to be in a room, some people are self-paced learners. And so what I've found is more times than not that it is a hybrid of learning, right? So we have some digital tools that we are building out. So whether it's micro content, whether it's soft skills, whether it's for people who are more self-paced, they can tap into that. We've identified that obviously everybody has a different craft and expertise, and a lot of people are more engaged when they feel like they're bettering their tools and their capabilities and their skill set. And so looking at ways in which we can have some effective learning that way. And then there is, that big bucket of innovation and leadership and creativity and how we inspire people in our everyday lives and at work, regardless of level. And so I don't think that there is a magic bullet. I think a lot of the times, unfortunately, it comes down to budget and prioritizing where you'll have the largest impact with your teams and what is going to be most meaningful, impactful, and purposeful in making those decisions for learning.
Yeah, no, so thank you, Marlena, and I totally agree. And you had mentioned soft skills. I just want to kind of comment on that. I mean, we're fortunate, I think, in many ways. I think we're fortunate to be living in what I think history will look back on as we're kind of going from one age to a different age. I mean, I think that we're living in a historical moment right now, kind of akin to, the early 1900s, where we went from an agrarian society to an industrial society. I mean, it's that different, right? And so when we say soft skills, I just think that is so undermining. It's like, no, they're not soft. These are the power skills, because this is what every single director, manager, leader needs to be competent in. It's table stakes. And I think that for so long, organizations have not been intentional in stating that. And given the moment that we're living in, when we have as diverse of a workforce and society that I've ever experienced in my professional life, which is a few decades, won't tell you how many, but like, it's like, okay, so the amount of differences that we all reflect is a pretty wide continuum. And to be a manager navigating in that environment takes intentionality and some skill. So I see Daniel had said emotional intelligence. Yes. I mean, we've called it soft skill. We've called it emotional intelligence. I just think of them as the power skills.
100%, they are power skills. I think most people, again, the era that I grew up in, those are the soft skills. But I think, to your point, if we're looking at our agencies honestly and transparency, or transparently, or our companies, we hire for the ability to deliver in the role, not necessarily to lead people, or historically we have. And so I think it is a mindset change that needs to happen. So I am 100% in line with you. I think that in order to get the best out of people and to create the best environment, you have to understand that there is not one type of leadership, right? You have to flex with the people who are on your team. You have to be able to make sure that they have the things that they need, and those things are going to be different because we are not a homogenous group of people. You have to be curious about the experiences that your people have, because if you have a diverse team, you know what? Everybody is coming from a different place and has a different experience. So I wholeheartedly agree. They are power skills, but I think the shift has to happen that we prioritize that as much as we prioritize the ability to create that great marketing campaign, or to create the great developer, or, you have people who have these hard skills and they're amazing, and you bring them in and you're just like, oh, but they can't lead. They don't do that. So.
Or they can't recruit, they can't retain a team. Like, oops, that's kind of a problem.
And also, can we just acknowledge that managing people and leading people is actually a whole job? Because we often acknowledge it from sort of when your starting point in your career as an individual contributor up. So we talk about this a lot in tech of, do you want to go on the people leadership track or the individual contributor track? And there's been all of this discussion about how, well, they're connected. And so it's not necessarily like a one or either or, it's a both and, right? Mm-hmm. But actually, when you're in a people management role, especially if you have a big team, you might spend most of your work week just managing that team and leading them and influencing them to get an output done. You may never do the actual core function of your job. So as an example, I'm over communications in our organization, but I'm not sitting here writing tweets, right? I'm leading a team and I'm building a team and I'm developing a team. And if I'm doing that right, that team together will do way more than I ever could as an individual. And so I think acknowledging people leadership as a whole valid job.
Whole wheel. Yeah, it's a whole wheel of work.
Is really critical. But I am so grateful, Marlena, that you started this conversation by saying, if I knew all the answers, I would be a rich woman, because I often feel like I don't know all the answers, but I'm trying. So I so appreciate that you said that. Yes. But when you first asked this question, Janine, I wrote down a few things that I thought, okay, what is critical for people to be successful? And one is, do I know my job? Do I know how to do my job? That individual expertise that you've been talking about. Two is, do I know how my organization gets work done? So like if I want to launch a survey, what tool do they use? Do I even know that tool? The third one was, do I know how to work in a diverse team? That's really important for us. So diversity and inclusion training, equity-based decision-making, that's really important to be successful at Women Who Code. And I would argue in any organization. Do I know how to work in a remote work environment? So that speaks, Janine, to your like modern day skills. And then the last one, was, am I comfortable showing up authentically? Because most people aren't.
No.
Most people, if you've been in the workforce for more than a minute, you've learned through experience that when you really show up as your authentic self, it doesn't usually work. So can you get comfortable in that space? And can you get comfortable when other people show up as their authentic self, and then figure out that intersection where you both bring value to the table? That's actually really hard for people to do, and really hard to cultivate in a culture. But I think it's something that's worth spending the effort to do.
Oh, for sure, Joey. And just, I take a long view, and I see it coming. Like, I can already see a workplace in a few years from now where that's just a given that everyone's gonna be there. Kate, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I think as we bring in new managers to our team, I mean, we certainly set them up for success with a toolkit of resources. I love Marlena's point around the variety of resources, just knowing and recognizing that everyone has a different learning style or has a different set of experiences or expertise that they're already bringing to the table. I think for us, there's some simple low budget things that can be done around process, right? How can we make their lives easier? How can we build in a cadence for feedback feeling like a continuous conversation and not something that we stop for a month every 6 months to do as part of a performance review? So I think we've really honed in on some of those process resource. How can we build a system that helps set our managers up for success and really bring them along with that experience, so that if they're new to the game, or if they're, they've been around the block a time or two, those teams are going to have equitable experiences, because we're building systems and processes to really support that workflow.
Awesome. I think we have time here for another kind of topic to explore. I'd love to hear from you folks some significant changes that you folks implemented at your organizations that really flow directly from employee feedback. So, Joey, I'll call on you first.
Sure. So this is a journey we've been on for a couple of years around implementing changes. So we really started focusing on anonymous feedback probably around 2018-ish, 2019, that time frame. So we've been focused on this for a few years. And 2019 was our most ambitious year up until that point from a strategy perspective in terms of what we wanted to accomplish as an organization. It was also a turning point for us. So we were going from being a small organization to being a hyper growing organization. And so a couple of things collided all at once. One thing is we realized we couldn't operate like that. We were breaking the team. And two, we also realized that, I think largely because of our mission in creating this desire to have open feedback, we started getting a lot of feedback. And so we needed tools, right? So we implemented All Voices as our anonymous platform. I can't stress enough how critical I think having an anonymous platform tool is. We started doing the monthly surveys, but as a result of those outcomes, we formalized our employee handbook, which was a year-long journey. So anybody that's thinking, oh, great, I'll write one of those this weekend, that was a year-long journey to really get that right and do all the consultation that we needed and things like that. So we launched our employee handbook. We hired a chief people and inclusion officer, and now have added a second people and inclusion team member. So we have created that whole team as a result of that feedback. We've really challenged our kind of founding leadership. We've really challenged our leadership to think critically about our own bias. We've really invested in trying to make sure that people had access to tools to really see what their role in that was. And then in 2020, because we had laid a lot of that foundation, I should mention we also implemented a series called Continuing Conversations to give space to have hard conversations about hard things happening in the world that our team members needed to talk about. But in 2020, when the world kind of started falling apart, we had already focused a lot on team care and creating these spaces. And I think it positioned us to really take a stance as an anti-racist organization and to embrace a pivot to digital much faster with team care at the forefront. And so, again, we don't always get it right. But those things are really, I think, strong foundational pieces. And we still have a lot of work to do, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
Awesome. Kate, let me hear from you next.
Okay. Joy, I just had a laugh thinking that it took you only 1 year to roll out an updated handbook, because it took us much longer than that. That's all I'll say to that. It's a labor of love, those updates. We received quite a bit of feedback and implemented quite a big change around our corporate cadence. So we were collecting feedback through our engagement survey, doing listening tours, just really gathering all this input. And a lot of what we were hearing was the cadence and the rhythm of our organization throughout the calendar year just was feeling a bit archaic. And we've scaled our team, we've added on lots of layers, and what was happening was the perfect storm of lots of initiatives all kind of intersecting during the same 30 days, which is just painful. And so it took us about 6 months, but we really took all of that feedback to heart, whiteboarded the whole thing, and really came up with a new flow for our organization of like new seasons and when things are going to land, and really being strategic around that, and bringing to heart that feedback, and making sure that this would set folks up for success. It would help with planning. It would help everything kind of feel a bit more lighter, and not so much that everything is due at the same time. We even, went from a weekly all hands to twice a month, and one's focused on business updates and one's now focused on connection. I think in an era where we're all remote or mostly remote, Zoom fatigue and meeting overload was becoming a thing. And we had been remote before then. So, these were some things that we needed to grapple with and really kind of pivot and adjust and adapt and try out some new concepts to really smooth out that experience throughout the year, so that it's not an added stressor, but it's, it's a backdrop to your work as you're working through the year. So
Yeah. No, thank you, Kate. That's excellent. And Marlena, what about your organization?
Yeah.
Milestones from the feedback?
Yeah. Again, ironically, another handbook, another year-long process. So, my HR peeps out there really understand what it takes to get those things updated and feeling right for everybody, and with the right balance of information. But all jokes aside, I do think that this has been a critical year for us in terms of feedback, because of the scale and the growth, the number of people we've hired, where we hired them from. Communication, I think, was something that we really had to focus on, similar to what Kate is saying. And so when we were all in one city, meeting monthly for our town halls, that was one thing. And I think when we transitioned post-COVID, it was just like, oh, we don't need to, meet monthly. We'll just focus on the newsletter, capture all the information there, but you do lose something, right? And so we implemented a engagement survey. We took all the feedback from our exit surveys, obviously great resignation year. We launched a separate diversity, equity, and inclusion survey. So we were a death by survey this year, but intentionally so.
Yeah.
And what we did was actually really kind of come back to our organization, talk about what were the key factors that came out and the key insights, and really put together an action plan in all of those areas. One of the areas that really was focused for us was really kind of burnout. People feeling burnt out, because we were ramping up. People were, before we were fully staffed, like leaning into so many different roles. Some people feeling like they didn't have the tools that they needed, and communication was a big thing. So now you're going from in-person to distributed to more people. So our communication cadence, our resourcing model has been changed, and we're really kind of revamping the way that we assign teams to work, and how many pieces of business that they're going to be on, and so on and so forth. And I think the other big piece was from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. While there were a lot of conversations happening at the leadership level, making sure that we were bringing all of our teams along for that journey. So being really clear about what our metrics are, what our benchmarks are, really kind of where we're headed in the future, what are the levers that we're going to pull, what kind of investments are we going to make. So I do think that making sure, again, whatever the mechanism is, anonymous, you can tie your name to it, whether it's those meetings, there's some place to aggregate all of those insights and information to be able to make agency-wide decisions on how we can change these things holistically. I do want to point out that I think Sarah wrote a question earlier about making sure that as a people manager, people leader, you have time to devote to the leadership. And that was something that we heard a lot about this and throughout these surveys, right? If you're in an industry like ours, you have billability targets and chargeability targets and all of that stuff. In a law firm, you know exactly what that feels like. But how do you manage leading a team and coaching and developing a team when it's not billable and you have targets? And so we had a lot of conversations about how do we make sure that what we are outlining as an expectation is aligned with really kind of what we're saying we need people to meet in terms of goals. So there was a lot of work done there, a lot of conversation there. So I think that's really important too, that there is an emphasis on how important leadership is and giving leaders time to develop and hone those skills and to manage teams.
Yeah, no, thank you, Marlena. So I just have a couple kind of thoughts from your point. So one, you talk about survey fatigue. I would be remiss if I don't mention that. So what Emtrain does is actually within your lessons and your programs on equity, on inclusion, it's a survey kind of stuck in. So people don't even realize they're answering survey questions while they're learning. For those folks who have pets, I always think about it as like you put the pill for the pet, for the dog, in peanut butter and they just gobble it all up. So it doesn't feel like survey fatigue. And then to your point of everyone feeling fatigued, I can say at Emtrain, one of the biggest, kind of results from employee feedback was our president, Odessa Jenkins, was, I think, quite astute and savvy. People were feeling burned out. We were kind of at overcapacity, right? And so I think earlier than I had seen other organizations make this move, she said, we're going to a 4-day work week. It kind of made our board of directors freak out a little bit, to be honest. But I kind of, thought about it. I'm like, you know what? Right on. Let's try that. And we have found, so we did it like quarter just to test it. And we're pretty much at the same levels of productivity than otherwise. But we see through like this whole kind of, virtual world, people are working longer hours. They just, they're either resigning or if they're not, they're working longer hours. And we just needed to have like a really hard delineation of like, okay, Fridays people are off. Just please unplug and go, which has been super helpful for us for sure. We are at the top of the hour, and I just want to again, a couple of housekeeping items. One, thank you, panelists. This has been like so helpful. I think such a great conversation to have. I would like everyone to continue the conversation. So I know that this is going to be recorded and on demand, and I'm sure it'll be on the All Voices website. It'll probably be, I'm sure, on the Emtrain website, and all of us in our LinkedIn profiles will be able to share it too. I would just encourage everyone listening in to just keep the questions coming, and we can answer them offline. Well, actually online, but offline, and to keep the conversation going, because I think as we've all said here, we're always learning. No one's got the perfect answer, and this is a community effort to kind of help us become wiser and better. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone have a great day.
Bye.